Well, greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to Star Wars Talk Tuesday, making Tuesday the best day of the week. Why? Because we're talking about the greatest thing mankind has ever conceived of, Star Wars. I'm, of course, your host, John Campea. Welcome to my YouTube channel. And today, look, I'm not even going to lie. This is a blatant ripoff of the John Campea podcast. But it's exactly the same, except all we do is talk Star Wars and take Star Wars topics and Star Wars questions and just talk about our favorite thing in the world, which is, of course, Star Wars. How do I get the topics and the questions? It's very simple, really. I get them from you guys. You guys send in the topics to me. How do you send in a topic? Simple. Just email me anytime at thejohncampeapodcast@gmail.com. That's thejohncampeapodcast@gmail.com. Send on in your questions. And when you do, this is important. Make sure in the subject line you put SWTT. That's Star Wars Talk Tuesdays. Put SWTT in the subject line so I know specifically, that this is a question or topic for Star Wars Talk Tuesdays. Because I'm getting a lot of email. I got to be able to have ways to easily find the questions and the topics that you guys are sending in. A lot of cool stuff going on. Of course, we just found out Paul Bettany has been added to the cast of the Han Solo movie. Of course, Paul Bettany has worked with Ron Howard on a number of Ron Howard's films, and I love Paul Bettany. I just think he's a terrific talent. I'm very excited that he's in there. What role is he playing? Is he picking up Michael's role that he had to walk away from? Is it a totally new role that they've added in to flesh out the story at this point? Don't know. We're just going to have to wait and see how this all turns out. All right. With all that out of the way, let's talk some Star Wars, and we go to the first topic today, which comes to us from Ali Hussein, who writes, "Hi, John. My question is, do you know if Disney is planning a Luke standalone movie? I'd love to see what happened between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens when Luke was training Kylo Ren and when Luke was creating a new Jedi Order. Keep up the great work." Thanks a lot for the question, Ali. And, there's so many. One of the great things about Star Wars is that there are so many amazing details in the Star Wars universe that you can explore and do stories of and all that kind of stuff. And it's wonderful. And a lot of fans, because we're so diverse, we have different parts of this Star Wars universe that each one of us would individually like to see and explore upon. I'm going to be honest with you, though. I don't like the idea of let's do a standalone Luke movie in between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. Luke Skywalker, when The Force Awakens starts, is shrouded in mystery. To the whole galaxy, Luke Skywalker is a mystery. He's disappeared. Some people even, in some sections of the galaxy, he's even becoming a legend, like a myth that some people don't even think he was real at some point. He's the guy who's the hero of the rebellion. Of course he was real, but he's disappeared for so long. Some corners of the universe, he's like, he was a myth, didn't even exist. We, of course, know because of what's told to us in The Force Awakens what happened. He went off, tried to get the Jedi Order restarted. He's been spending a lot of his time going around trying to collect old Jedi artifacts, going to all the Jedi temples, looking for the first original Jedi temple, try to get everything all cleaned up. We know that. But honestly, to me, that's all I need to know. Like, I know everything else that happens. I mean, as far as the big, tentpole events in the life, we know. He started to train new Jedi. Han and Leia sent his son Kylo to him. Kylo eventually betrayed him, destroyed it. We know all that. I don't need more prequel stuff. And yes, even though it happens after Return of the Jedi, it's now prequel. It would officially be prequel because we're now in The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi era. Don't need more prequel stuff. Tell new stories with new characters. Move on. Let's move on. Plus, also, Mark Hamill can't play that role. Like, if you're trying to go back 20 years to Luke starting to train new Jedi, you can't do that with Mark Hamill at this point. You can young him up CGI-wise for a scene or two, but you can't do a movie based on that. And I talked about that on the John Campea podcast the other day. You can't do a whole movie like that. So, honestly, I don't think they have any plans. I don't believe they have any plans, and I don't want them to have plans to do that myself. That's just my opinion. I know a lot of you are like Ali, and you'd love to see that sort of a story. Who knows what they'll do, but as far as I know, they have no plans to do it. All right, thanks a lot for the question, man. We move on to the next question. And the next question today comes to us from Damian Roberson, who writes, "Hey, John, loving the new stuff you're doing. My question is about Rebels. In one episode, you see Leia as a teenager, or so then in the old let me try that again. See Leia as a teenager or so. Then in the old Obi-Wan, where he faced Maul, I accidentally spent male. Maul, you see a small child that is insinuated that it's Luke. What gives? Obviously, Leia and Luke should be the same age, so that small child could not have been Luke. I can't wrap my head around this. Maybe you can shed some light on this for me. Thanks. Well, thanks a lot for the question, Damian. And yeah, if you remember, last season or earlier on Rebels, we have an episode where Kanan and Ezra actually work with Leia, with Princess Leia. Obviously a young girl at that point, but already bold, already a leader, if you will. And then in the episode where Obi-Wan and Darth Maul face off against each other, at the end of that episode, you see Obi-Wan, I believe he's riding a dewback. I think it was a dewback. It might have been something else, but he's riding a dewback, I believe, and he comes across the Lars farm, the moisture farm. And you hear Aunt Beru going, Luke, Luke, and then you see this small figure running across the sand, running into the little apartment. So that was clearly Luke. The question is, Leia, teenager, that was a small child. Well, there's a couple of ways to kind of look at that. Number one, just because it was short, remember Leia called Luke short. Just because Luke was, maybe he's just short, that's all. Also, remember, the image is like this big. Like if you're watching your television screen, that image of Luke, the kid running across, was like this big. It was really off in the distance. It's very difficult to really determine how tall or short the character was. But just because he was short doesn't mean it was a child. Because obviously Luke and Leia have to be the same age, right? So not a child. Now, there's another way of looking at it too. Let's say that little tiny figure that we see just as a speck on our TV screen running across, let's say that was a child. Okay. Perhaps that shot of Obi-Wan riding up in the distance up to the Lars farm, maybe that didn't happen right now in showtime. Maybe that's a flashback 5 years ago or 4 years ago to Obi-Wan looking over Luke. So I don't think it was a child. I just think it was a short person, and I think that was Luke. But even if it was a child, then you could probably just easily explain that by saying that's a little bit of a flashback of Obi-Wan remembering when he went in to check on Luke, because now he's thinking about Luke. So he's thinking back on that time. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. I just think it was Luke, and just the perspective of it threw us off, made us think it made it look like a child to us, but I don't think it was. But even if it did look like a child, I think it's explained by maybe that's just a little bit of a flashback. So anyway, that's just my thought. What do you guys think about that whole thing? Jump into the comments section and let me know. All right, we move on now to the next question. And the next question comes to us from John Spear, who writes, Hey, John, quick note on a previous question about Rey was able to hold her own against Kylo. I completely agree with your 2 points about number one, Rey is very proficient in melee combat from her life of fighting for survival. And two, Kylo Ren was bleeding out in that fight, so he was less than 100%. One thing I think you left out, though, which also supports your stance, is that Kylo was not trying to kill Rey. Okay, thanks a lot for the question, John. What John's referring to in a previous question I addressed was this whole thing about, oh, Rey's a Mary Sue because blah, 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 and she shouldn't have been able to fight Kylo Ren and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, look, if you call Rey a Mary Sue, then you just weren't paying attention to the movie and how flawed that character is, how naive, how gullible, how all these other things. And I think the movie, I think you weren't paying attention to the movie. If you have a real problem with Rey being able to have a fight with Kylo Ren, I think you just weren't paying attention to the movie. Because here's my big point, and I'll get to John Spears' point here in just a second. My big point was this. Number one, the movie already established with us that Rey is great in fighting with in melee combat with her staff. She's had to fight to survive her whole life, so she's proficient. Does that mean she should be able to go up against a dark side force user like Kylo Ren? Not necessarily, but not all things were equal. The movie also went to great lengths in advance to show us just how powerful Chewie's bowcaster is. Chewie's bowcaster is a formidable, powerful weapon. Far more powerful than the blaster Han Solo uses. And we saw Han Solo kill a lot of people with that handheld blaster. Han Solo in The Force Awakens uses Chewie's bowcaster once. Is like, I like this thing. It's far more powerful. than this murder weapon that Han Solo uses. It's far more powerful than that. And Kylo Ren took a direct shot right in the abdomen from that bowcaster that was blowing people away. He was mortally injured, okay? He was mortally injured at that point. The dude was bleeding out. He was going to die if somebody didn't come along and rescue him, all right, at some point. So what I like to give, here's a good way of making the example. Okay, let's take a weapon that's nothing compared to Chewbacca's bowcaster. 45. One of our own Earth's 45 caliber gun, all right? Now let's take Floyd Mayweather. Arguably one of the greatest boxers of all time. I don't like him at all, but arguably one of the greatest boxers of all time. You put me in the ring with Floyd Mayweather. I've had a little bit of boxing. Put me in the ring with Floyd Mayweather. He's obviously going to destroy me incredibly quickly. Obviously. Couple of punches, I'm down. However, just before my match with Floyd Mayweather, let me take a 45 caliber gun and shoot him in the stomach. Now that I've shot Floyd Mayweather in the stomach with a 45 caliber gun, now let's start our boxing match. I like my chances. I like my chances against Floyd Mayweather having just been shot in the gut with a 45 very, very, very much. Now, multiply that shot in the gut with a 45 caliber times 50 with being shot in the gut with Chewie's bowcaster. Far more powerful weapon. So yes, I think it's amazing that Kylo Ren did as well as he did. So absolutely Rey should win that fight. But John Spear brings up another great point. Remember, Snoke's instructions to Kylo is, bring her to me. Kylo had no intention of killing Rey. So even if he wasn't all that wounded, and he was, the movie showed us how powerful that bowcaster is. Even if he wasn't all that wounded, he was having to hold back a lot because he could not kill her. Because Snoke wanted her. That means killing her was not an option. So he had to fight her in such a one hand tied behind his back kind of way that he had to make sure he didn't mortally wound her or hurt her all that much. So now, and John Spear brings up a great point, you add that to the pile of evidence. Rey was already well skilled in melee combat. Kylo Ren was already shot in the gut with Chewie's bowcaster, and the fact that he couldn't fight her as openly and as freely as he wanted to because he had to make sure he didn't kill her. At the same time, you put all of that together, it would have been ridiculous for the movie to have Kylo Ren winning that fight. I don't care who he is. It would have been ridiculous to have that fight turn out any other way. So yeah, it absolutely made sense to me. And again, I just go back to put me in the ring with Floyd Mayweather, and I will win that fight if you allow me to shoot him in the stomach with a 45 caliber gun first. I'll win that fight. You'll win that fight too. So yes, I completely agree with your point, John Spear. Great point. And thanks a lot for sending that in. All right. We now move on to the next question. And by the way, I'm doing more than 6 questions today. I said last week, because we fly through them pretty quick here on Star Wars Talk Tuesdays. So instead of doing 6, I'm going to do 8 today. So let's move on to the next one. And the next one comes to us from Sebastian Gomez. And Sebastian Gomez writes, "Hey, John, do you think that Thrawn will survive Rebels Season 4 and be sent off to the unknown regions by Palpatine? The Thrawn novel mentions there is a threat from another galaxy coming. Could it be Snoke? If it is, then that could explain, then could Thrawn, Eli Vanto, and the Chiss appear in Episode 9? Thanks a lot for the question. And, you know, if you didn't read the Thrawn novel, I'm sure most of you didn't. Eli Vanto is a human character that starts working and works quite well and works right alongside. He's Admiral Thrawn's right-hand man in the novels, or in this one particular novel. Now, in the novel, Thrawn's speaking to different people at different times, and he alludes to there's greater threats past the Outer Rim. So what are those threats? And maybe Grand Admiral Thrawn doesn't die in Rebels Season 4, and he makes it out of it. And the way you explain his absence from Star Wars Episode 4 and all the movies that come after it is maybe he got sent out to the outer reaches. Maybe he got sent way out there beyond the Outer Rim into the unknown regions to confront whatever threat that was, which is ultimately where they said he was in the Heir to the Empire novels. the Thrawn trilogy, that as we refer to it. That's where he was there. So maybe that's what they do. Also, if you really want to play in the Legends area, in the extended universe area, remember in the novels, they started introducing a new race that was a threat to the galaxy called the Yuzhang Vong. And some people say I pronounce that right. Some people say I pronounce it wrong. Whatever. It's the Yuzhang Vong. That they're this horror, like they look like they're straight out of a horror movie race that's coming to kill and conquer everybody. So maybe that is the threat that Grand Admiral Thrawn is alluding to in the Thrawn novel. Maybe. It's possible. I still think that if I had to put money on it, I still put money on Thrawn dying in episode 4. It's much cleaner. It makes much more sense. But because even if you said by the end of Rebel Season 4, Thrawn gets dispatched by the Emperor to go out to the unknown regions to fight whatever this mysterious threat is that they allude to in the novel. Even if you say that, then you're not explaining, well, then where the hell was he once the Empire fell? After the events of Return of the Jedi and the Empire fell, there's no more Empire. So where is he at that point with his Imperial fleet? Why is he not mentioned in any of the events that happened after Return of the Jedi? It just seems like you're creating a continuity problem by saying he's still alive. Look, I am not telling you that absolutely Thrawn dies in Rebel Season 4. I can't say that. I think it's likely that that's what happens. I think it makes the most sense that that's what happens. But the good folks at Lucasfilm have surprised us many times before. Maybe he does make it out of Rebel Season 4. I'm just saying I doubt it. I think it makes much more sense that he dies, some kind of big climactic death in Rebel Season 4, doing something grand or whatever. Maybe Kanan, maybe Ezra, maybe somebody else. Like maybe Hera is the one that ultimately takes him out because she's got the biggest bone to pick with Thrawn. Could be. Or maybe he does make it out and they've got future plans for Thrawn. We'll just have to wait and see what Lucasfilm is planning for all of our absolute favorite blue-skinned, red-eyed Grand Admiral. All right, thanks a lot for the question, man. Okay, we move on now to the next question, which comes to us from Jason Busch. And Jason Busch writes, on a possible Kylo Ren versus Luke Skywalker duel in Episode 8, my friends all tend to agree that Luke would win handily. However, when considering that Luke has been on his own for years and seems to have lost his mojo, and when you consider Kylo is in his physical prime and seems to have a bone to pick with Luke, I argue that a duel between Kylo Ren and Luke would be much closer. How would you see a fight between Kylo Ren and Luke go down? All right, thanks a lot for the question, Jason. And I would answer that question like this. And again, this is just my opinion. You may be right. This is just my thought and how I look at it as a Star Wars fan. Consider the lesson of Master Yoda. If we're just talking our regular world and our regular rules of physics and all that kind of stuff, yeah, the older you get, the slower you get. Yeah, if you've been out of practice and you're not fighting on a constant basis, you get ring rust. And maybe you can't fight as well. Sure. But this is Star Wars, and this is the Force that we're dealing with. You think Yoda lost a step when he was just 600 years old? No. Why? As Yoda explains, because he is strong with the Force. The Force is his ally. And he's strong. He just got stronger and stronger in the Force as he got older. And so even as a little decrepit old guy walking around with his cane, when Dooku shows up, boom, lightsaber time, I'm going to kick your ass. When Palpatine reveals himself as the Emperor, pulls out the lightsaber, came close to kicking the Emperor's ass, ultimately lost that fight, but he held his own pretty damn well. So I would say no. And what's to say that Luke has lost his mojo? For all we know, he has been immersing himself deeper and deeper into the Force all this time. Like, I don't think there's anything in The Force Awakens that suggests to us or that should lead us to believe that somehow Luke has lost his mojo. No. He faced a tragedy. He decided on a new course of action. He went into hiding. He went into exile. But what he was doing in hiding, what he's been doing in exile, we don't know that yet. For all we know, he's been becoming more and more powerful than we could possibly imagine. Because remember, it was the Emperor himself who, when talking to Vader, is like, hey, I'm Emperor Palpatine. I'm the guy who beat Yoda. You're Darth Vader. You took out all the Jedi. This Luke Skywalker kid could destroy us. Remember that in the original trilogy? He could destroy us. He was alluding to the fact that Luke Skywalker on his own could take down everything that Palpatine and Vader had built. So there's a foreshadowing of just how powerful Maybe at the time it wasn't being fully manifested and fully realized, but just how powerful Luke is and what he would become. And I think the lesson of Yoda proves that the older he got doesn't necessarily mean he gets weaker in the Force. And just because he doesn't have other Jedi to spar with, remember, it's all about using the Force. And I think he would be just fine. And yes, I do believe that your friends are right. I believe when your friends say Luke wins that fight easily, I think that's what happens. I think Kylo Ren and 10 of his other buddies all ganging up on Luke at once, that's a fight. That's a fight. Kylo Ren on his own, one-on-one against Luke Skywalker, maybe the most powerful Force user in the history of Star Wars. Not so much. I think Luke probably kicks his ass pretty quickly and pretty convincingly. Just my opinion, though. I'm curious, what do you guys think? Like, do you think that Jason's got a point? Do you think maybe that fight could be closer than we're anticipating or closer than we're giving it credit for? I'd love to hear your thoughts. I can have my mind changed. Jump into the comment section and leave me your thoughts. All right, let's move on now to the next question. And the next question comes to us from one of my Patreon supporters, whose name is Jim. And let me do my shameless plug in my long videos I do for my Patreon. You know, as many of you guys know now, I left the corporate world. I decided, you know what? I don't want to do my film punditry and everything working for a corporation anymore. I want to do it on my own, apart from the corporate entities that I've worked for in the past. And I've worked for some very nice corporate overlords, but they were still corporate overlords. But to do it and to do this full time, it was a massive risk and a commitment. I mean, doing it full time, making 70 to 100 videos a month, I needed some support. And my Patreon supporters have come and make these videos possible. Do you want to become a Patreon supporter of mine? Here's a link. Check out this URL. You'll get all types of information about what being one of my Patreon supporters means, what's involved and all that kind of stuff, and see if maybe being one of my Patreon supporters is for you. I'd be very grateful. But even if you don't, that's okay too. I'm just glad you're here watching the videos and being a part of the conversation with us. Okay. Let's get back to the question. Again, from one of my Patreon supporters, Jim. And Jim writes, my question is about Vader, one of our favorite topics. I really hope they don't try to shoehorn Darth Vader into the new Obi-Wan movie. It would seem out of place to me. That being said, do you think there is a way that they will try to do so in future Star Wars films? Not to be dark, but I mean, James Earl Jones is 86 and may not be around for the voice in the years to come. Thanks for taking my question. Yeah, you're right. James Earl Jones is 86. We can't expect him to be Vader forever. I just went to go see John Williams in concert twice this past weekend. I went on Friday, I went on Sunday to see John Williams because John Williams is 85. I mean, I don't mean to be dark, but at some point, John Williams is going to decide to retire. John Williams is going to decide, you know what, I've done this enough. I'm going to go hang out at Cabo for a while. I'm going to go soak in some sun. You know, he's going to decide to retire at some point. So I wanted to soak in and appreciate John Williams as much as I can before he decides to hang it up and retire. At some point, James Earl Jones is not like, forget James Earl Jones dying. At some point, because James Earl Jones could be alive for another 20 years. But at some point, James Earl Jones just ain't going to want to work anymore. And good for him. He's just going to say, no, I'm not going to come and stand in a sound booth for 5 hours. I got better things to do, like sitting back and watching HBO and sucking down beer. That's what I want to do because I'm retired. And he would have every right to do that. So yes, at some point, James Earl Jones is not going to be voicing Vader anymore. And you know what? That's okay. That's okay. A Darth Vader on screen, whether it's live action or animated or whatever, will always be richer if it's actually James Earl Jones doing the voice. There's no disputing that, and there's no objection to that. Absolutely, that's the truth. But James Earl Jones has done enough to create the ambiance and who this character is for us that if somebody else comes in and has to do the voice and is able to mimic and impersonate his voice at least close, doesn't have to be perfect, just close, I think we'll be okay. I think Star Wars will be all right. It's not like, oh my gosh, Harrison Ford broke his leg. He's not available to play Han Solo. Let's get somebody else to play Han Solo in The Force Awakens. That's totally different. With Vader, it's just the voice. And granted, it's one of the richest, most beautiful, most powerful voices in the history of Hollywood. And again, let me reiterate, anything with Vader in it will always be better if it's actually James Earl Jones. Yes. But you can do it. There have been video games. There have been other things that use somebody else just trying to mimic James Earl Jones's voice. Will it be as good? Nope. Absolutely not. Won't be as good. But will it be good enough? Yes, it can be good enough. So it's okay. that, I mean, you don't rush into doing movies just because we have to do as many things with James Earl Jones as we possibly can right now. Give the guy a break. Give James Earl Jones a break. Come on. Now, as far as whether or not Vader will be in Obi-Wan, I've talked about this before. I do not think he will be in Obi-Wan. I do not think he should be in Obi-Wan. Look, and it's funny because I actually just today, me and Christian Harloff had lunch today, and we were talking about it because Christian does believe that they will put Darth Vader in Obi-Wan, and maybe they will. I mean, I don't know what Lucasfilm's plans are. They might. They may not actually. They may put him in the movie. But he thinks they should. I think they should not. Regardless of whether they do put him in the movie or not, I think they shouldn't. Why? Because here's the discussion me and Christian basically had. Like, Christian's point of view, and who is, you know, a huge Star Wars fan, knows his Star Wars stuff, absolutely. And I respect Christian's opinion a great deal. And, you know, his thing was, but if you listen to the words like, you know, I haven't felt this presence since, and he doesn't say since when. So maybe it was a more recent time. Or he says this and he words it this way. And my argument against that is this. The common understanding since day one of Star Wars, since A New Hope first came out, has been that the last time Vader and Obi-Wan met was their battle that left Vader the way he is. It was their fight on Mustafar. Nothing in Star Wars history has ever suggested otherwise. Nothing in the original trilogy or since the original trilogy has ever suggested that Vader and Obi-Wan came face to face again. It's never been suggested. Now, can you take Vader's words in A New Hope, a presence I haven't felt since, can you take that phrase and twist it to kind of force it into meaning or to changing its meaning so it does allow for them having to come face to face once before? You know, when Vader says, Obi-Wan once thought as you did, can you find a way to twist the meaning a little bit so you can force it into a meaning where, if you look at it a certain way from a certain point of view, then yeah, that could mean they came face to face before. Yeah, you can do that, but you got to acknowledge that that's what you would have to do. You'd have to be forcing it to change the meaning of what the message of Star Wars has always been. The generally understood message of Star Wars has always been that the last time Vader and Obi-Wan came face to face was their battle on Mustafar. That was the last time. So yeah, you can engage in twisting and playing semantics with the words and all that kind of stuff to force Vader into an Obi-Wan movie. But that's what you'd be doing. You'd be playing semantics to force him into the movie. So, and that's what they might do. I'm not going to tell you that they won't do it. They may. But I will tell you, I think it's the wrong thing to do. There's a lot you can do with Obi-Wan that doesn't need to have Darth Vader there. And there's a lot you can do with Obi-Wan that would be awesome without the need to trample on what has been commonly understood canon up until this point. I think you're playing a dangerous game if you start playing semantics with words. Like, well, yeah, he said that, but if we look at it a certain way, you can make it look like it's this. Yeah, but then you're playing semantics with canon. And I just don't think they should do it. Will they do it? Maybe. I mean, look how popular Darth Vader was in Rogue One. Everybody freaking loved Vader in Rogue One. Me too. So maybe Lucasfilm is going, well, gosh, we need to put more Vader in stuff. And I would understand that they would think that way. But I really hope they don't. To me, it's a sin against canon, I think, to do it that way. That's just my opinion. A lot of you guys will have a different opinion, and that's great. That's what the best thing about being Star Wars fans are. We can have different theories and different opinions about this. You jump into the comments section and let me know why you think the way you think. All right, let's move on now to the next question. And the next question comes to us from Leigh Hawker, who writes, my question for you is this. With John Williams already confirming that he will be scoring Indiana Jones 5, due to be released in 2020, doesn't this pretty much guarantee that he'll also score Star Wars Episode 9 that isn't due out until the year before? Well, thanks a lot for the question, Lee. And yeah, I mean, John Williams himself said at his concert at the Hollywood Bowl, not this weekend, but like 2 years ago, that he's been contacted. He's going to be doing the score for another Indiana Jones movie. We already know that Steven Spielberg said they're doing it. They still haven't hammered down when. There was a recent interview with the screenwriter for the new Indiana Jones movie, and they said he's not really sure when they're going to shoot it. They're hoping it'll be Steven Spielberg's next film, but they didn't know for sure if it was going to be the next film that Spielberg directs or not. Harrison Ford isn't getting any younger. So will John Williams score it? Maybe. He's 85. At some point, he's going to retire. But if he does actually score Indiana Jones, and Star Wars Episode 9 comes out the year before, I still don't know that that guarantees John Williams will score it. Remember, they just did a Star Wars movie that didn't have John Williams scoring it. He is getting to the age now that he's going to want to be more picky and choosy about how much work he wants to take on. And remember this too. Really, they like to leave it up to the directors as to which composer they want to work with. Doesn't always happen, but for the most part, it's up to the directors. Remember, John Williams told the story this weekend at his concert where he said it was Rian Johnson who reached out to John Williams and said, will you score this film, Star Wars Episode 8? To which he said, of course I will. But it was Rian Johnson. If Rian Johnson wanted to use a different composer, I think that Lucasfilm probably would have led, because the composer and the director have to work so closely together in, coming up with the feel and the tone and the way the music's going to work with the film. I mean, it's the composer that does all the composing, but they've got to come up with things that the director likes and understands and wants, and they have to have a great communication between them. If Rian Johnson had wanted a different composer, like say he wanted Alan Silvestri, or maybe he wanted Michael Giacchino, or maybe he wanted Danny Elfman, or maybe he wanted Zimmer, or maybe whatever. If he wanted a different composer, they probably would have let him have a different composer. But they let him go with John Williams. So partially it's going to be up to the director. Look, long story short, even if he is doing Raiders of the Lost Ark, I don't think it guarantees he'll do Episode 9. I would put my money on it, but it doesn't guarantee it. All right, we move on now, guys, to the final question of the day. And the final question comes to us from Jim, who's also one of my Patreon supporters. And Jim writes, like many fans, I'm really hoping for an Old Republic storyline. The question I have is, with a thriving Jedi Order and many Sith adversaries in the mix, can a movie adequately develop so many potentially amazing characters? Do you think Netflix-style series or a book would be better? Love your Star Wars talk. Well, thanks a lot for the question, Jim. And yeah, there are a lot of great characters in the Old Republic. Remember, almost none of them are canon right now, so they don't have to use any of them, or they can use as many of them as they want. But to say there's too many great characters in the Old Republic to do a movie on, that's like saying there are too many important people and great characters and heroes on both sides in World War II. There's literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of significant people who played a part, an important part, in what World War II was and how it played out. That doesn't mean you can't do a World War II movie. It just means you pick certain characters, whether you want to pick your character to be a Winston Churchill, or whether you want your character to be this person or that person, or this general, or this national leader, or this unsung hero, or this nurse, or whatever, whoever's point of view you want to tell your World War II story about, then you just make it about them. Not every World War II movie is about every single person who had a significant role to play in World War II. That would be impossible. So if you wanted to start telling some Old Republic stories, you don't have to say, oh, wait a minute, there's 100 different characters. How do we put them all into the movie? You don't. You pick a couple of characters, and you pick a couple of years, because Old Republic spans thousands of years. It's not one day. So you pick one particular set of years, you pick a couple of key characters, and you tell a story from their vantage point, from their point of view, just like you do with anything else. Just like you do with every 9/11 movie that's come out. It doesn't tell the story of every single important person that had a role to play in 9/11. No. Every 9/11 movie that's come out is told it from a certain perspective and certain people and certain characters it focuses on. You don't do anything different for Old Republic. And you can come up with 10 different movies for the Old Republic, 10 totally different storylines that all take place in the Old Republic era, because you don't have to jam it all into one. I still don't think a live-action Star Wars series will exist on Netflix. I've got a theory, though, about the new Disney streaming channel, but I'll save that for another video. So no, I think it'd be perfectly fine. You just pick a couple of characters you want to focus on. Anyway, guys, that will do it for my favorite show of the week, Star Wars Talk Tuesday. What do you think about any of the stuff we talked about? Jump into the comment section below and leave me your thoughts. Hey guys, while you're here, why don't you take a second, click on the subscribe button, become a subscriber. If you like any of my videos, do me a favor. Make sure you click the thumbs up button, leave a comment, share this video on your Facebook or Twitter, whatever. Spread the word about Star Wars Talk Tuesdays. One of the most fun places just to get together and talk about Star Wars. Anyway, that'll do it for me, guys. Thank you so much for joining me, and until my next video, bye-bye.